All right, ready to go. What's up, everybody? I'm John Fatten from Cisco Umbrella. Got a little bit of information to talk about today. The topic here was called Anatomy of an Attack. I'm going to focus specifically on some cybercrime methods and the infrastructure contained in some of the malspam campaigns that are contained within that. So we'll talk about a couple of different tools that we have, but also just want to bring to light really a bunch of different pieces of information and how we can pull that together to sort of see what kind of threats are out there and what they look like. Can everybody hear me okay? Awesome. All right. Threat intelligence is information that can be used and acted upon to change really an outcome, right? And this says raw data does not equal threat intelligence. So essentially you need a lot of data, you need a lot of relationships between different pieces of data, and a human element to really kind of bring all that together. So human expertise and context around a question or a concept is really what goes into creating threat intelligence. And here's a slide that comes to us from the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And it's kind of a good slide because it talks about the relationships between data and information and then what turns into an intelligence. And so you can see here that intelligence is really derived from a huge collection of data in this funnel type of view here, right? So an enormous amount of information has to be collected. It's got to be sorted through and processed. Joint Chiefs of Staff seems to know a lot about exploitation, so that's a term that's on here, which is kind of cool. Must be the NSA. Anyway, that information then can be filtered down. We find information from that, and then depending on what you're looking for, what kinds of particular requirements that you have for your information. So, for example, if you're trying to stop a breach or look to see how to remediate a breach that may have occurred, or you're trying to prevent a different type of a imminent attack from occurring, those are all different things that will go into sort of figuring out what that intelligence looks like and how to prioritize it. So a little bit about Cisco Umbrella. Cisco Umbrella, formerly OpenDNS, is an organization. Obviously, we collect a lot of data. We have 90 million users globally in 160 different countries that every day are essentially resolving about 125 billion DNS requests. So that's a ton of data that comes into. We collect that massive amount of data. What's really nice about that data set is that it's very diverse, very rich, very diverse. And so as we talk about this today and the threats that we see, just consider this huge collection as being the central piece of it, and then we'll get into how we drill down and look at the actual intelligence contained. So the entire cybercrime ecosystem really hinges on one common thing, and that is it's the bulletproof hosting providers, otherwise known as BPH. And I want to talk about those providers today because they're set up worldwide in a lot of interesting places. But here we can start extracting some information and start to show a little bit about their methods and their operations. One thing that's kind of cool is that those organizations, the organizations that set up really the bulletproof hosting environments, they kind of leverage services in three different ways, right? So if we look at cybercrime, product, services, and goods that are out there, the key thing there is that if you're wanting to set up a bulletproof hosting environment, it really doesn't take a whole lot of money. On average, it's around $5,000 or roughly there. You basically start with registering a shadow organization or an offshore company in a place like Belize or Panama, some location where we call it cybercrime, but it's maybe not criminal in those jurisdictions. A lot of times you'll find that those countries also lack the ability to really police or really enforce any rules or regulations because they simply don't have the resources necessary to do so. And so what we see here is just a persistent cybercrime environment that leverages these hosting providers all over the place. I mentioned also, we'll talk about not only dedicated hosting providers, but also this concept of a hybrid BPH. And what is that? That essentially leveraging other hosting providers that we all use on a regular basis. I'll get into that in just a second. So there's Alex BPH out there. It's been around for a while, and they've got a business model out there very much the same way. One is to establish a local storefront. It's to set up a international front shell company, which they've done. And then another key thing is to really be able to establish and build a reputation by providing to cyber criminals, essentially, solid support and stable services, right? So, you know, more or less customer retention there. Good stuff, right? Okay, we're going to take a look at one of these malspam attacks. This is specifically from the Alex BPH, but 6 steps in this attack that we'll take a look at here. On the left-hand side, this is all originating from a phishing attack. We'll take a look at the copy of it. Comes from a spoofed domain. Victims are encouraged to click on a particular URL or a link there. Unbeknownst to them, it takes them to a specific location where there's a Word document that's downloaded, which basically drops Hansator, which is a dropper program on the system. Hansator then evades really a lot of virus protection systems because it's really not an infection. But essentially, that dropper program, when it's run, then makes command and control calls out there to try to download specific Trojans. There's 3 Trojans, in this case, that are used pretty routinely. From there, there's additional command and control calls that are made out to pull down whatever future malware or whatever the next step that they want to use. But you end up with an infected device that essentially is ready for exfiltration or ransomware or whatever you want to do. So this happened on Wednesday the 30th of a year ago, August 30th, sorry, August 30th, 2017. And you can see up above, the spoofed email address is deltaperformanceair.com, right? And this is a pretty good email. I would probably fall for it if I flew Delta. I don't really fly Delta too often. But it basically, you get an email saying, hey, your order's been processed, right? And you'd be like, what? I didn't order a ticket. I shouldn't have a ticket in here. And so here's the link, and then the URL associated with that link is down below. It's myhearthstonehomes.org. Okay, so taking a look at that, pretty easy to be tricked into clicking on that link, right? We've seen tons and tons of examples. Social media gets us to kind of look at these phishing attacks on a regular basis. So we're going to look now at what's behind the scenes in some of these URLs and do a little bit of pivoting to try to understand exactly how this infrastructure works. So this is a look at the Cisco Umbrella Investigate product. Essentially, you can type in a URL or an IP address, start pulling back a lot of observables, or essentially that intelligence about that particular domain. So in here we see that my Hearthstones, homes.org. I don't know if .org would have given it away for me, but Anyway, it resolves to a particular IP address in here, and what's the key thing here is that we've associated this with the Hansiter dropper. That's the information that came back from Umbrella. But the interesting thing is that IP address here had a huge spike in queries that we identified on that specific day. So it was only there for just a short period of time. Okay, so then if we want to look at the IPs associated with that particular domain, here you see on the 30th, it's a particular IP address, right? The original IP address that the registrant set up. And then, interestingly enough, the next day, it actually transitions to a different IP address, 184.168, so which is a GoDaddy IP address. So it's there for a blink, and then it transitions to 184. So if we want to take a look here now at the 52.14 IP address, you'll find that that particular one shows us a couple things. It's blocked as malware. We find that it has the characteristics of bulletproof hosting, which we know. But the interesting thing here is that the ASN is associated with, or essentially it's an example where the hosting provider is actually abusing AWS here. So allowing criminal customers essentially to leverage AWS services here. So looking at that IP address a little bit further, you can find all the different domains that we've seen associated or hosted on that IP address, right? Some of these are dead giveaways in many cases when you're looking at this analysis, but the one that's highlighted here happens to be another domain that was found in the body of that email. So that email header information all had a couple different domains, one of 5 different domains that it could route to. So heymamaradio.com is one that was located also in the body of that email. Okay, so if we do a quick look at heymamaradio.com, in this case, it's also associated with a Hansiter dropper program. So it's got a score. We blocked it in the Umbrella program. But the interesting thing that is, heymamaradio.com, a different domain, had the exact same spike on the 30th of that day. So a number of different domains were being essentially used for the same purpose. And then another interesting thing here is that when we're looking at the IP addresses associated with it, you can see that the IPs have changed a little bit over time. So the day before, on the 29th, we saw that the original 185.197, which is the registrant's IP address, was leveraged, and then it transitioned to AWS for a period of 7 days or so. Right, and then it went back, essentially, to its original registrant. So this is just some information about, sort of what's occurring. And if we were only looking at the 52, we wouldn't see really everything. So it's important to look at, in this case, the IP in green, which is a legitimate and essentially a benign IP address. It has to be looked at and analyzed as well. And so you're seeing some of the benefits of really a lot of different data and statistical models looking at various patterns, again, from that huge collection of, the massive collection of DNS requests that are out there. But it really gives us some insight into sort of what's happening, how the behavior changes IPs, and then routes back only to avoid detection. So one more thing here, sorry. Last slide I wanted to mention here is that I talked about some of these patterns essentially in here. So when we look at the different campaigns, oftentimes what we see, and we're looking at spike patterns, or we're looking at co-occurrence patterns. In other words, what domains are you being redirected from, or what's happening right after a domain request is being made. All those things kind of help us identify exactly what other domains are also malicious in the entire environment. So some really good visibility in terms of being able to see that information. I just wanted to help share that with you today. The Cisco umbrella provides that investigation or investigate tool in really a couple different ways, two different ways. One is there's a console. We saw the screenshots of that console a moment ago, but there's also an API that can feed into SIM technology. All the information that's in there is really observables that we collect in that data center. It's also fed by Threat Grid, as well as various artifacts, file artifacts that we find from Cisco AMP. Okay. That's it. Any questions? No. All right, thanks.